Good evening, everybody. Hello. Sorry it's a bit later in the day today. I think I mentioned yesterday I've got a deadline at the moment for a book that's due in on Thursday because it comes out next Monday, called 6 Days, 6 Hours, 6 Minutes. And because the deadline is so tight, it has to take priority. So I've been working on that most of today, about a quarter of the way through. Editing, that is, not writing. Even I don't leave my deadlines that late. But here we are on Escape from Furnace Fugitives. We are probably coming up for about past a third of the way through the book now. Alex and Z and Simon are fugitives from justice, fugitives from Furnace. They're in the city. They started in the subway where they realised that Alfred Furnace had sent some more of his his monsters, and these monsters, these berserkers, can convert ordinary humans into rats, like the ones in the prison, by biting them and basically infecting them. They've met a girl called Lucy who's kind of reluctantly joining them on this journey. The city is in chaos. Nobody knows what's going on. The police are all over the place. The army are all over the place. Everybody's going a little bit mad because there are these monsters in the smoke. Buildings are on fire. And they've just fought a few rats that turned out to be Bodhi. Well, I really liked Bodhi. And a few of the other prisoners who've just kind of mindlessly attacked them. Z has literally just said he doesn't think it's an invasion or an invasion. He says, I think it's a plague. We shall find out if he is right. I'll probably only read a couple of chapters today because it's quite late, but we'll see how we go. Okay. St. Martin's. We stared at Z as if he'd gone mad, as if he'd suddenly snapped under the pressure. Simon even snorted a laugh in his direction, shaking his head in denial. You're off your head, Z-boy, he said as he ran his hands over his body, checking for injuries, for bite marks. Nectar don't work that way. It's not contagious. Isn't it? Z asked. He walked over to the car that Lucy had been in, looking down at the shotgun the inmate had been using to smash through the windshield. He seemed as if he was about to pick it up, but then obviously thought better of it, turning back to us. How do you know? Duh, Simon replied, gesturing at his enormous, misshapen arm. But look at Alex, Z said. He's changing. I lifted my right arm, the muscle so big now that the sleeve of my hoodie had ripped. It still looked as if something was moving under my skin, black worms that appeared and then vanished before I could make any sense of them. It wasn't sore, though. In fact, if anything, I felt stronger than I ever had. I felt as though I could take on every single one of Furnace's freaks with that single, bulging limb. It doesn't matter what's going on, I started, cradling my arm against my chest. Z cut me off. Doesn't matter, he said, one eyebrow raised. Look around you, Alex. Tell me it doesn't matter if the city's overrun by whatever Bodhi was. I did as I was told. Not that I could see much with the ocean of smoke churning around us. It had grown thicker, blocking out all but a halo of dull orange that sat just above the horizon. It hung in the back of my throat, burning like acid, and I hawked up a ball of dry spit. He was a rat, Simon said, and Z nodded. I didn't believe them. I mean, how could Bodhi have been turned into a rat without the surgery, without days spent in the infirmary, in the screening room, slowly losing his mind as the warden's poison went to work? But now wasn't the time to argue. The fire behind us was spreading fast. There was no sign of the emergency services. If we didn't get moving soon, then we'd be barbecued. And I could hear more screams from close by, chirruped cries of menacing delight carried on the filthy air. If Z was right and this was a plague, then the streets would be crawling with those things. But he couldn't be right, could he? I thought about the new nectar, the crimson insect eyes that swam inside it, and the way it seemed to crawl inside my wound like it was alive, and I shuddered so hard I almost lost my balance. So what now? Asked Lucy. She was leaning up against the car, her arms folded over her chest and her chin almost resting on them. She spoke in a robotic monotone, one that I recognised from Furnace, the voice you used when your brain went into survival mode, switching off everything but the bare essentials. We keep moving, I offered. North, I guess. We stick to what we agreed, get the hell away from here. If we just keep moving, then we'll think of something. It wasn't the best plan in the world, but nobody had a better one. With a collection of weary shrugs and sighs, we set off up the road, sweatshirts pulled up to our mouths to keep the smoke out. We could have taken a car. There were enough of them around. Too many, in fact. The road was littered with vehicles, like an assault course. It was actually quicker on foot, and we made good time considering we had to stop again and again as those relentless shrieks faded in and out between the buildings. With each step, the smoke grew thinner, its acrid touch weaker. I studied the shops and offices that emerged from the smog. A travel agent, 2 betting shops, a computer service company, a pawnbroker, a drugstore, wondering if we'd be better off taking shelter. But it felt good to be moving, even though we didn't know where we were going or what was waiting for us. Every step carried us further from Furness Penitentiary. Sometime later, we reached a crossroads, the signals blinking from red to green and back again, controlling non-existent traffic. There were vehicles here too, one sickly yellow sports car buried deep into the side of a white van, the windshield broken, the driver nowhere to be seen. Ahead was what looked like another fire, this one blazing on both sides of the road, spreading into a small park between offices, the trees like burning hands held up to the heavens. It looked like there were shapes in the flames, figures dancing between the trunks, reminding me of some weird pagan ceremony. It had to be an illusion, but it creeped the hell out of me, and I turned away only to see something that scared me 1,000,000 times more. To my left was another street, a wider avenue with flowers planted down the divide between the 2 lanes, abandoned cars spilling along its length. It stretched downhill all the way into the centre of the city to the distant skyscrapers that stood there like sentinels. And among them was the spire-topped monolith of black glass that I knew from my nightmare. My ears began to ring, and for an absurd moment I swore I could feel that building searching for me, like a giant eyeball scouring the city. The ringing grew more intense, unbearable, like a high-powered drill working into the flesh of my brain. And suddenly the view before me changed, the other buildings crumbling slowly into a cloud of debris, like they'd been demolished. The city glowing red as the steel foundations of every building began to melt, ashes incandescent as they rained upwards towards the roiling black sky. And all that remained was the tower, and perched on the throne of its sloping roof, a monstrous, merciless creature that howled into the flames, claiming victory over the world. Then I blinked, and the street was black, looking positively heavenly compared with the vision. I swallowed and my ears popped, the ringing ebbing away into silence. I peered up to see Z's eyes on me, but he didn't say anything. If he wasn't used to my sporadic moments of madness by now, then he never would be. I pointed down the street towards the city, but it was Simon who explained. "Furness," he said. "The prison?" asked Lucy. "No," Simon replied. "The man. That's where he is, that tower." And he explained what the 2 of us had seen. "In that case, my friends, I suggest we go this way," said Z, setting off along the street opposite, one that led away from the city, away from the tower. "That's the wrong way," Simon called out after him. "You're going east." "Doesn't matter," Z said over his shoulder. "Running into the police is the least of our worries now. Whole city's a death trap. We're better off heading out of it while we still can." He was right, and I was happy to turn my back on the distant skyscraper, even though I imagined I could feel its depthless windows boring into my head, making note of where I was, keeping track of every step. I did my best to ignore it, focusing on the road ahead. After 100 metres or so, it divided into 2. The bigger branch was blocked by a barricade of concrete blocks, a police van stationed behind them. The door of the van was open, and from inside I could make out the sharp static bursts of a radio. We stepped closer, warily, until the jumbled words began to make sense. "Need backup. Immediately. 1000, 1024. Repeat, we are under attack." The cops swore, and I heard gunfire over the radio, the noise too loud for the empty street we were on. There were more curses, then a deafening bleep as the radio cut out. Almost instantly there was another broadcast, a woman this time. "Everywhere, don't know, can't, Screams, then a growl, loud enough to make the van's speakers vibrate. "What the hell? 10, screw it, let's just get to the CC fast. They're everywhere." More followed, but by that time we were walking again, taking the smaller road which angled gently to the left. There was more smoke here, starting as a fine gossamer-like mist that hung a few feet off the ground, thickening quickly as we approached a burning car. We gave it a wide berth, worried that it would suddenly blow up, pressing through the worst of the smoke to see a shape looming up before us. It was huge, emerging from the gloom like a tanker coming to dock in a fog-drenched harbour. I smeared the tears from my eyes, and the silhouette took on a shape, a round dome that I recognised. St. Martin's, I coughed. I'd been here once before, years ago, on a school trip. Memories of cold stone, uncomfortable pews, and beating up a kid called Andrew Spragg in the shadows behind the pillars until he'd handed over the money he'd brought to buy a souvenir. I felt my cheeks redden, wondering, not for the first time or the last, whether I even deserved to be saved from this nightmare, whether I should have just stayed in Furness, accepted my punishment for who I used to be. The enormous Baroque building sat in the middle of a tiled plaza, deserted apart from the army of pigeons that huddled in the centre and cooed curiously at us. We started across it, making for the other side, and had taken a dozen steps when we heard somebody calling. We froze, expecting the worst, but there was no malice in that voice, no menace, just concern. "Over here," it hissed, the whisper carrying across the open ground. "Quickly!" The front of the cathedral was a sculpture of pillars, reminding me of a matchstick house. It was difficult to see into the darkness behind them, but as I looked, I could make out a black-robed figure standing there and waving at us. "What does he want?" Simon asked. An answer leaped into my head from nowhere. Trouble. But I left it unvoiced. The figure stepped past a column, glancing nervously to the left and right, before gesturing at us even more enthusiastically. I saw the white collar and realised he was a priest. "You kids need to get off the streets," he shouted. "Haven't you heard? Come, you're welcome here. It's safe in the house of the Lord. Come, pray with us." "This guy has no idea," Simon said, but Lucy was already hurrying across the plaza without so much as a backwards glance. "We should take a look," Z said as he watched her go. "It's safer than out here, right?" "But we need to get out of the city," I said, although I couldn't deny that a chance to rest my weary body would be welcome. Besides, those relentless calls were still rising up over the rooftops. Shrill whoops and barks that set my teeth on edge. It wouldn't hurt to take shelter for an hour, get a better idea of what was going on. "Come on," said Z. "It looks safe enough." "Yeah, like that's all you're concerned about," Simon replied with a smug smile as he followed. He put on a falsetto, clasping his hands to his heart. "Oh, Lucy, wait for me. I'll look after you." Z turned and scowled, the blood rushing to his face. And, incredibly, we were all laughing as we entered the vaulted doors of St. Martin's. I was laughing because I've just remembered what happens inside the cathedral. But no spoilers. God's house. The cathedral was just as cold and as dark as I remembered. The priest, a short, wiry man with a neat beard and clipped grey hair, led us through a small lobby into the main body of St. Martin's, muttering as he walked. Lucy was tucked beneath his arm, crying soundlessly, her shoulders twitching. Inside it was more like a cave than anything, the stained glass windows vast but leaden, the smoke outside like old curtains that cut out all but a trickle of dirty light. 2 rows of pillars lined up on either side of us, between which were the rows and rows of wooden benches which made my ass feel numb just looking at them. Bum, that's what we say over here. Resting on these, draped in dusty shadows, were a number of people, all with their backs to us. Some were hunched forward in the pews, obviously praying, while others talked in hushed voices. I noticed that the biggest group was clustered around something on the floor in the main aisle, close to the altar, a small shape that I couldn't quite identify. A couple of them turned around when they heard our footsteps, their faces full of fear. I found some more, the priest called out, his voice swallowed instantly by the immense space, as though the cathedral was demanding us to be silent. The thought brought gooseflesh out on my arms. He turned to us, squinting into the darkness, and his smile suddenly grew nervous. I knew why. Our clothes covered up most of the scars in the surgery, except for my bulging arm, but mine and Simon's eyes must have been glowing a fierce shade of silver in the half-light beneath the dome. He swallowed, cocking his head and clutching loosely, tighter to his chest. "Are you children of God?" he asked. I almost burst out laughing, managing to bite my tongue before it erupted. The air was thick with incense, the smell making me sleepy, sitting on my eyelids and pressing them down. "You may rest here if you are. Each of his flock is welcome." I looked at Simon, unsure what to say. Luckily, Z stepped in. "And I saw the beast," he said, the cathedral turning his shout to a whisper, "and, the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war." The priest's face opened up and he lifted one hand from Lucy, holding it out to us like the Pope addressing the faithful. I threw Z a look and he returned it with a bashful smile. He didn't have to speak for me to know he'd heard it on one of his documentaries he used to watch with his parents. "Revelation 19:19, the priest beamed. "You are welcome, child. You are all welcome. Come, pray with us." He led us forwards towards the group of people. I counted 7 of them, and as we drew closer I realised the shape on the floor was an 8th. It was a kid, and he groaned feebly, writhing on a bed of hassocks and turned and tucked beneath a blanket of coats. His face was a sickly shade of yellow, and it was filthy, dark lines like war paint stretching from his neck to his forehead. "Take a seat, anywhere you like," the priest said, helping Lucy onto a pew. She put her head in her hands, staring at the Bible on the shelf in front of her and rocking gently back and forth. The more voices we have, the better. He will hear us." "Is he okay?" Z asked, nodding at the kid. "I don't know," replied a young man in a suit. He was kneeling by the child's side, holding the boy's hand in both of his own, and he looked up at us through a thick pair of glasses. I noticed that the kid was wearing a green sweater. He didn't look like an inmate. "We've called an ambulance." "Fat chance," said somebody else. A woman 3 rows further down peered over her shoulder, glaring at us. I noticed she was wearing a hat and a uniform, and I thought for a second she was a cop before realising she must have been a security guard. "All over the radio, emergency numbers are down. We're on our own." "Well, we have God," the priest interrupted, but the woman waved his comment away with an impatient hand, turning her attention back to the altar. The other adults, a mix of men and women, mostly older, in their 40s and 50s, shuffled uncomfortably while the kid strained and whimpered beneath them. I did a quick head count. There were 18 of us in total. "What's it like out there?" the man in the glasses asked. "You see anything?" "Saw plenty," Simon replied. "She's right, there's no cops." I tried not to think about the policeman we'd seen, putting a gun to his head and blowing out his own brains. Sure as hell didn't see any ambulances. "What happened to him?" Z persisted, pushing through the small crowd and kneeling beside the kid. "I'm not sure," the glasses man replied. "I was on my way to work when everything kicked off. He was outside on Slate Street, around the back there. There was blood everywhere. I thought he was dead." His voice lowered to a whisper. "The blood belonged to his parents. They were... His voice caught in his throat, and I thought he was about to vomit. "I couldn't get through to EMS, so I brought him in here. He's alive, but he's been hurt pretty badly." He reached out, pulling back the brown cord jacket that was covering the boy's neck, and I felt my heart drop right to my feet. There was a bite mark there, unmistakable even in the cathedral's sulking light. I could make out the teeth marks, blunt stab wounds that stretched from his collarbone to his windpipe, embellished with bruises. And what I thought had been dirt was something worse. Those dark trails were nectar, pulsing beneath his skin, spreading out through his body. The kid seemed to grow more anxious under our scrutiny, attempting to burrow deeper into his makeshift bed. "Oh, Jesus," said Z, earning a stern glare from the priest. He was bitten. "Bitten?" asked several of the adults together. The man with the glasses finished. "By what?" Z ignored them, standing up and walking towards Simon and me. I'm telling you, Z went on, quieter than before, leaning in so that even with every eye in the cathedral fixed on us, he wouldn't be heard. It's a plague. It's spreading. If you get bitten, you turn. Oh, come on, Z, Simon replied. These aren't zombies we're talking about. That's crazy. Excuse me, said the priest, taking a step closer. Do you know something? Any information would be helpful at this point. We kept our mouths shut, unsure what to say, but Lucy seemed to wake from her daze, peering out at us through eyes that reflected the dappled mosaic of light from the windows. They're from the prison, she said softly. They escaped. They know what's going on. The priest stumbled back, clutching a pew to stop himself from falling over. Several of the adults retreated too, some even uttering absurd cries of distress. The rest looked as if they were preparing for a fight, their eyes steely and their knuckles white. Is this true? Asked the priest, making the sign of the cross over his robes. You're from Furness? I nodded, getting ready to run. I didn't honestly think this bunch of geriatrics would turn on us, but I knew what people were like. You take away the things they take for granted and they soon go mad. It's like ripping out the foundations of a house and watching it crumble. When you think about it, we're all insane. We just don't know it till we're given a little push in the wrong direction. But they're okay, Lucy went on, aware of the growing tension. She looked at Z and offered him the ghost of a smile, which almost knocked him off his feet. They seem okay. They saved me, really. I'd be dead now if they hadn't showed up. And they do seem to know what's happening, as insane as it sounds. You're better off listening to them. The crowd seemed to relax, although their bodies remained stiff, mouths screwed into little more than slits. The priest recovered himself, smoothing down his robes and looking at Z. Is this true? He asked. Do you know what's going on? Z shook his head. Not everything. Not even close, he said. I'll tell you what we know, but first things first. He pointed at the kid on the floor. You need to tie him up, and tie him up good. Okay, I know it's a short one today. I'm sorry about that. The next chapter is called Toilet Break, which incidentally is what I need now. A little bit of information there for you. Thank you very much for joining me. Like I said, after Thursday, so Friday onwards, I'll be back to normal. But actually, 2 chapters is normal, isn't it? We only have a treat every now and again of 3 or more chapters. And you have had a 5-chapter instalment this week. So, what was it last week? Is it Monday today? I goes lockdown. I completely lose track of the days. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. We are probably getting towards halfway through the book now. I just remembered about this scene in the church and something that happens later on. And I remembered how much fun I had when I was writing it, but also how gross it is and how horrible. But we will come to that probably tomorrow. So I hope you have a lovely evening wherever you are. And I will see you probably in the morning if I can get some work done tonight. And if not, it'll be in the evening again. But it will be sometime tomorrow, I promise. Anyway, hope you're well. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.